Alright, so this is my meals app for the first part in section 8 that we had to cover. So this on the right side is what the app looks like once you get through half of what you need to do for section 8. You have the categories at the top with all the different names of the categories in different colors throughout the app. Right here, you can actually just like click and scroll, and it'll actually show you all the different types of options you have for the categories. You can go and look through, see, you can swipe through. At the bottom, you have categories, which just shows you all your different options that you can have. As well, if you click favorites, you can actually go and see which recipes you actually favorited. Right here, we have no meals that we already favorited, so right now it's going to be empty, and it's going to tell you that there's nothing here. You can select a different category, as well as changing at the top which actual page you're on from categories to your favorites. So we go back to categories and say we click on Italian. It'll send you to this screen, which shows you all the different types of foods that under the Italian name. Right here, we have spaghetti with tomato sauce. It gives you the time of how long it takes, how complex or simplistic the actual meal is going to be, as well as the price of it. It's going to be affordable. It's going to be more on the expensive side, more on the cheap side. And when you actually click on the actual food, it'll give you the ingredients list, all centered in the middle, as well as the steps. And as you can see, the steps sort of go off to the end of the page, so you can actually scroll to see all of the different steps that you need to actually make the food, as well as a star at the top right that allows you to actually click, and that'll actually add this type of food to the favorites list. So you can go through, and that's what it's like for all of the other different types of categories. You can see for one, like quick and easy, there's multiple different foods that you can choose from. So you can actually scroll on this to actually see all the different options. As you can see, some of them have pricey for the classic hamburger and like the luxurious for the asparagus salad with cherry tomatoes. As you can see, it all differs for the prices, differs for all of the different foods that you can get. And as even though we did click one of the favorites, right now we have not implemented the actual transfer of the favorites over. That's going to be later on in the lectures. So actually going over to the code now, we have the main.dart file, which I use to set the actual seed color for the actual theme of the app, as well as our main function, which is used to actually run the app, extending into a stateless widget, using a theme, and the actual tab screen, which is basically where you see all the different types of foods that you can choose from. Going over to the categories.dart file, this is where you see all the different categories you can choose, as well as selecting the actual categories, being able to toggle which ones you want to favorite, which has not been completed yet, but that's for later on in the section. As well as going down here, we have for the actual grid view, allowing you to see all of the different foods that you can choose from in the grid. Right down here, you actually have the category in the available categories, which is just going to be the ones that we have already set in using the set in food categories that were given to us by Flutter. Going over to the category grid item dart, this is for all the different items that's going to be in the actual grid. So right here we have you're using Inkwell and using OnTap for the actual apps that you can click on for all the food. We have a splash color to use the primary color of the image of each grid, so that way when you click on it, it splashes that same color once you actually go inside of the food that you choose. This is using for the padding and decorations, just choosing the actual size of the boxes. Using a border radius of circular makes it so it's not just pointy rectangular boxes, it's actually going to be circular on the sides. This makes the colors with a bit more opacity so that it's easier to read all the wording, so it's not too hard to understand. As well as this child at the bottom for the text allows for the not making the title too large on the actual box so that it doesn't take up the entire box. Moving over to the meal item, this is where you actually use for each different actual meal that's given in the grid. So right here we have on select meal, which is basically just used for the actual meal that's being selected by the user. Here we have the actual for the actual complexity test, as well as for the affordability, being able to write the actual string of if it's how affordable it is, how complex the actual meals are. This is what these functions are for. It returns the actual name of the affordability and complexity of each food. Right here in this widget, you're using again for the border radius circular, making sure the boxes are not squared off, but actually rounded off. Down below, we actually have fade in image. This was used for the actual images of the foods that were being used, as well as memory image, which was taking it, creates an object as an image. as well as the transparent image, which was used so that the images were able to be visible and keep the wording there so it wasn't too hard to see. Moving down, we actually have the colors for the actual position, as well as the making sure the edge insets were symmetric, making sure everything was centered on the screen and it's not put off to the left or the right. Moving down, you have more of the actual setting, the actual text, making sure it's centered, make sure it's being able to be readable. Again, right here for the meal item trait, we use the dot icon schedule for the actual time to show how long it was going to take for each thing, including the label for minute, which is just to show the actual time for each different food, as well as the complexity and the affordability, which was the tiny little words at the bottom of each meal to show you how long it took, how much of a complexity the meal costs, and how affordable it was going to be. Moving to the meal details.dart file, this was what was used for actually the ingredients, which was going to be a list of strings, so it would show all the different steps that you would need to actually make all of the food. Again, using the void function for on toggle favorites, which was just used to make sure that when you actually send it over to the favorites tab, it would actually be sent over there once it's toggled over to favorites, which hasn't been implemented yet. But here we use the single child scroll view to actually scroll through to make sure that you can actually see all the ingredients in case it goes over the page because of just how many ingredients it's going to be on the page. You can see here we set for the text for ingredients. This is what just the string was going to be for that, as well as the size box for the meal final ingredients in the actual ingredients of string. Here we're just setting the size of the actual ingredient list as well as just for the body, making sure it's medium for long passages of text. Here we have this text file for the steps, which is just all of the different steps that you need to actually make the food, as well as just for the ingredients, which is just showing you all the ingredients that you're going to need. Again, for making padding for the actual symmetric size for this child widget, making sure that everything's set in the right order, make sure it's all symmetrical, as well as copying over the background and making sure the theme and the color scheme actually matched with the actual boxes. Going over to the tabs.dart file, this was used actually for each of the different tabs on the screen, making sure you had to extend it into the tab screen state, setting up for the favorite meals again, and this was for actually toggling the meals, your favorite meals that it would be using, showing that if there is something, if the star is clicked for the actual favorite, then it would remove it. If it's not existing there, then it would be adding there. So if it was already in the favorites and you click on the star, it would remove it from favorites. If it's not already there, it would add into the favorites. Here we have select page, which was just set the state of whatever page you click on, that it would be the page that it is sent you to. Scrolling down here, we have the widget for the actual category screen, which would just be set as categories. It says at the top left corner. And if it says the page index is 1, then it would toggle over to the actual favorites tab. That way, when you actually click on the little favorites at the bottom right, instead of the categories tab, it would send you over to that. And this is using for the body and the app bar, actually being able to name it, the label categories, label it favorites, making sure you can distinguish which of the two tabs that you're choosing. Moving over to meal item trait. This was just for the item for each meal that you're going to be using. This just required that you use an icon and a label to make sure that you can know which item you're going to be talking about. Again, here we use the string because all of the different things are going to be used as a string. It's all going to be words that we're going to be posting on for the items. And this is just we use the widget to actually return for the child size, an icon, what color the actual words are going to be, as well as just the text style that's going to come in. Moving over to the meals.dart file. Right here we have for actually choosing for the string, again, if it is a string for this title, which is going to be all the words, since it's all the words would be strings, and the list for meal, which is named as meals, just because all of the different meals were going to be made into a list. Again, using the on toggle favorite for when you actually click on the favorites tab. And going out here for select meal, this is where it would push off using navigator push to actually move over all the different meals that you would push into the favorites tab. This way, every time you click the star, it would push that item into the favorites. Moving down here, we have the widget for the favorite screen. When you don't have any favorites actually chosen, it would pop up the text, nothing here. And this would be in the center of the screen, showing in large bold text that you don't have any favorites. And it would tell you to select a different category, which would just be prompting you to go back to the categories page to actually add something to your favorites. Moving down, you see if it says we have an if statement for it, meal is not empty. So if it's not an actual empty for meals, then it would actually display that meal item on the selected meal that's chosen. And if the title was null, then it just returns the content, which actually then nullifies this return scaffold at the bottom, because if the meal is not empty, then it would just return that it would actually return what's being chosen. All right, moving on to the category.dart. This is basically just showing the actual category, giving it a color, an ID, and a title using the string, because it's going to need a string for the title, a string for the ID, and then for the color, it would just be the color orange that I set it to. This was the dummy Dart file, which basically just showed, this was basically a downloaded file from Flutter, which basically set all the different categories as well as giving them their colors that they needed, each one for each different category for Asian food, breakfast, exotic, French, stuff like that. This was for the actual constant for dummy meals, which is basically just all the strings that you needed. It showed for the title, the affordability, the complexity. You actually use an image URL for the string, which was used basically just to pull an image from the internet and actually be able to implement it. The duration was for 20 seconds for this integer, as well as the ingredients, which again were strings, as well as the steps, which were strings. So you all fit that into a string file. Using this again for this one was for the all the different types of Boolean variables that could be added for gluten, vegan, vegetarian, lactose. That's what those would be for. And that's basically was copied throughout this whole file, just using for the different categories for all the different types of food that needed different strings because they all had different ingredients, steps, complexities, affordabilities, durations, and all the different booleans for if some of them are vegan, some of them are not. Going through all those different types of foods and going through each different one. Finally, we have the actual meal.dart file, which basically was used as a class for the complexity and affordability, setting them as enums for the simple, challenging, and hard variations, as well as the affordable, pricey, and luxurious to go through each of them. And this was where you actually used the required this for all the different types of strings that you needed for ID, category, title, image URL, ingredient, steps. Then for duration, you needed an int for the actual time, complexity used for the complexity, affordability for affordability, and then booleans for the gluten, lactose, vegan, vegetarian. And this is where it actually shows that right here, a string, a list of strings, the strings, ints, complexity, affordability, as well as the boolean, which was used for each of those. And that was the entire app.